Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to welcome to Monday. Um, as you can see, if you're in person or online, there's not a whole lot of people who are currently present. Um, and so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with some project work, so we can spend some time working on our projects that we'll be presenting next week, starting Tuesday. Next Monday is the holiday, so we'll be starting next Tuesday. I'll give you some time to work on those, and then toward the second half of class, I have some things to show you and some things we need to read and questions we need to answer. So I think we'll start off with um, we'll start off with some project work, and then hopefully some more people will show up and we can begin our work on the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the Russian Federation. But for now, I'm going to let you get to work. If you have any questions for me, you can certainly ask. But that's what we'll do for the first part. Okay, so I'll turn you loose to get to work, and I'll put some time on the clock just so you know how much time that we're going to have. Okay, but again, if you have any questions while you're working, just let me know. Okay. Okay, good people. So, time is up there. The 45 minutes is up. And so, maybe what I'll suggest here is that we take a little break, stretch our legs, come back, and we'll go back to the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the Russian Federation. Okay, so take a quick break, come back, and we'll switch gears and do some history stuff. Okay? All right. All right, and we are back. So let's reorient ourselves here. We've had a little bit of a work period. The first part of the ouch. That really hurt. Ugh. The first part of the class, and we had a quiz on Friday, sorry. So let's kind of rewind back to Thursday, right? So we said that Gorbachev had come to power in the USSR in '85, and he had tried to institute a bunch of reforms, right? He knew that the Soviet Union was struggling economically, kind of the economy had ground to a halt. They'd been investing a huge amount of money in a nuclear arms race with the United States. They'd been involved in a war in Afghanistan, which was pointless and costing huge amounts of money. And so Gorbachev knew that, change had to happen. And he tried a few things to kind of stimulate the economy, right? He tried his acceleration, right? His uskoryenia. He tried his agriculture reorganization. He tried his enterprise law and some other reforms that kind of, didn't really do much, right? And so he figured that, political reform was necessary, right? So he came across this idea of Glasnost, right? So he basically lifted censorship, granted freedom of the press, granted people the freedom to speak openly about problems with the Soviet Union. And again, this is something that you couldn't do prior to Gorbachev, right? People were monitoring your conversations. The KGB was the internal police. The KGB was spying on Soviet citizens, making sure that they weren't anti-government or anti-communist. And Gorbachev said, we can't do that anymore. You can't fix problems if you can't talk about them. And there's a lot of problems. And so Gorbachev says we need openness, right? We need the ability to talk about it. But again, once he institutes his policy, people start to complain pretty loudly about the country itself, right? Because again, the economy's been struggling, their quality of life is much lower than, their American counterparts, and people are unhappy, right? People want a better life. He also embarks on this perestroika, this restructuring. Again, that starts out as an economic restructuring, but pretty quickly he realizes they're going to need political changes as well, right? And probably the biggest political change that he makes, sorry, I'm going to jump ahead here, is in creating the Congress of People's Deputies, right? So there's a group of people brand new in the Soviet state, and they are elected from the population, right? And these people have power now within the Soviet government, right? So he has this Congress of People's Deputies created, and representatives are elected from all of the republics in the Soviet Union, right? We see that this guy, Boris Yeltsin, gets himself elected to the Congress of People's Deputies, right? Former Communist Party guy, secretary for city of Moscow, kind of like the mayor. But then he criticizes Gorbachev a little too much, and Gorbachev demotes him, right? Puts him in charge of something not very important. So as soon as the Congress of People's Deputies is created, Yeltsin resigns, runs as a People's Deputy, and gets himself elected, right? We said that, as we move into the sort of very early 90s here, there's a power struggle between Boris Yeltsin and Gorbachev, right? By this time, Yeltsin has convinced the Republic of Russia to create the position of president. So he's now president of Russia, right? Similar to Gorbachev as president of the USSR, right? And so these guys are kind of in a power struggle, right, against who's going to get to do what. And in the midst of this kind of tug of war between these two guys, we see an attempted coup, right? An attempted overthrow of the state. And so a few Communist Party members, they call up their friends in the army, they roll tanks into Moscow and try to take the parliament building, right? And so while they're doing this, they manage to detain Gorbachev at his dacha, at his summer house. So they kind of hold him there. Yeltsin's out of the country, but he manages to get back, right? He manages to get on a plane, get back to Moscow, and show up there, and he has a big moment, right? And we saw in the documentary, he's on top of the tanks, giving a speech and saying to people, hey, we need to fight for our democracy, right? We need to fight against these people who are trying to take it away from us. And so a bunch of people show up and sort of, create a human shield between the tanks and the legislature, the parliament building. And basically the army says, okay, this isn't going to work. We're not shooting these people. It's all over, right? And so this coup, this sort of overthrow collapses because it wasn't very properly organized in the first place. And life goes on, right? But as Gorbachev and Yeltsin are trying to write a new constitution for the Soviet Union, it seems that Boris has his own plans, right? And so he's negotiating with the president of Belarus and the president of the Ukraine. And so one weekend, they all go away to someone's summer house, and these three presidents sign what is it called? Bielovesia Accords, right? And this agreement means that Russia and Belarus and Ukraine are now in their own, they've joined their own union, right? And so they're the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States, right? And so what's happened here, of course, is that, there we go, all of these Soviet republics are leaving the union, right? And so Kazakhstan is leaving, and Georgia and Armenia, they're all bailing out of the union. And finally, when Russia and Ukraine is number 10 there. Nope, that's Kazakhstan, sorry. Where's Ukraine? 5. Oh yeah, it's way over there, sorry. Ukraine and Belarus, which is 4, sorry. Once they all bail out of the union, basically there's nothing left, right? This is a union of republics with no republics in it, right? And so we see that again, everything happens on December 25th. I don't know why. Everything happens on Christmas Day. But here on December 25th, Gorbachev goes on TV and he resigns, he quits, right? Because again, there's no USSR anymore, right? All of the republics have left the union, they've become independent, or they've joined the Commonwealth of Independent States. And that's kind of it, right? And so they lower the Soviet flag that night for the last time, and then on December 26th, that's the flag that gets raised in Russia anyway. And we have kind of the birth of a brand new country, the birth of the Russian Federation. And so what used to be up there in red, which was a giant landmass, right? Probably I think the largest country in the world at the time, you can see it broke up into a bunch of smaller countries, right? And you can see here in Western Europe, we've got lots of changes that happen as well, right? So Yugoslavia will come apart and break into these little republics. Czechoslovakia will break up into Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, I think, initially. Don't quote me on that. Here we have a united Germany, right, rather than just East Germany. And then we have all of these other republics that are appearing as well, right? So it's a lot of change, right, as one giant union breaks apart and becomes all kinds of brand new states, right, brand new countries. So after this happens, in 1991, it's pretty big news, right, headed into 1992, I guess. Pretty big news, but there's a lot of initial concerns, right? So the Soviet Union has collapsed, but the first thing that people are worried about is, okay, well, what happens to all those nuclear weapons, right? We said that the Soviet Union had about 35,000 of them stockpiled away. And now that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, where are those nuclear weapons and who has them and what are they doing with them, all right? And so pretty quickly the UN tries to get involved. They cooperate with the Russian Federation, trying to get all those nuclear weapons moved back into into the Republic, into the Russian Federation, right? They don't want them sitting out in some republic to be sold off or to be used against their neighbors or anything like that, right? So the first key is to get those nuclear weapons back within the Russian Federation where they can be kind of safely controlled, right? Again, there's the question of the seat on the UN Security Council. Who will occupy it, right? And of course, the Russian Federation eventually does. Again, there's some ethnic conflict in these former republics, right? Because the republics that we see in the Soviet Union were kind of taken over by the Russians, but they're not ethnically Russian. They're something else. And again, there's the question of what is this new country of Russia going to become, right? Is it going to become a democracy? Is it going to become a market economy? Is it going to become a dictatorship? What's going to happen now that this thing that we knew what it was is now gone, right? What is going to appear in its place? What kind of country? So I'll show you that later. So that brings us to this, right? The birth of the Russian Federation here in December, well, I guess in January of 1992. So I have a short section for you to read. It'll talk about some of the issues that Boris Yeltsin and the Russian Federation are going to face, and then I'll kind of explain some things that are not super well explained in the book, okay? But it is important to understand, if you want to understand how Russia is today, you'll need to understand what happens in 1992, okay? So I'll give you a few minutes. This section's in Microsoft Teams, of course. Give you a few minutes and then we'll talk, okay? Oops. right, people. So, as you can see here, there's some issues, right? So, you know, having the Russian Federation sort of bail out of the Soviet Union and, you know, enter their own commonwealth of independent states, I guess it solves one problem, right? So Yeltsin doesn't have to deal with Gorbachev anymore. He can just kind of do what he wants. But again, it doesn't really solve everything, right? So the Russian Federation leaves the Soviet Union and kind of becomes its own country. But there's still a lot of problems. And what are some of those problems?
The economy was very bad, and Russia's capitalism was not successful. All the things people use they become like much more expensive. And I think this book is a paper was very expensive. Like before it takes 4 rubles per kilo, but now it takes 1,000.
Yeah. So yeah, their economy's kind of struggling, right? And the fact is that a lot of, because the economy was so bad before, the Soviet government was controlling prices and keeping them at a level that people could actually afford, right? And of course they do that by kind of pumping money into the system. But without those controls, prices go up through the roof, right? Prices increase because the Soviet government is not controlling the prices anymore, and they're not subsidizing them, right? They're not, when something is subsidized, it's like the government's paying for part of it. But now the government's not paying for part of it, and they're not controlling prices, and they shoot up, right? And so yeah, bacon goes from 4 rubles to 1,200 rubles, right? I imagine not many people were eating bacon in the Russian Federation at the beginning, right? And that's just one thing, right? And prices shoot up for everything. But there's other issues as well. What are some of these other issues?
Rights, competitions, high prices, and speculation in ordinary consumer goods, raising inflation, future of privatization systems, and low-meeting standard of living resulted in several economic hardship of the ordinary Russia.
Yeah, this is the tricky part, right? Here's the tricky part. The tricky part is that in a full-on communist system, the government owns everything, right? So every business, every service, all of them are owned by the government. But in a capitalist system, almost everything is owned by regular people, okay? So, you know, non-government people. And so the question is, how do you go between the two? How do you get, you know, when the government owns everything, how do you get those things into the hands of regular people? How do you kind of transfer ownership effectively, right? And it's tricky, right? Because some of these things are massive enterprises, right? Like you have, in the Soviet Union, they have the oil and gas sector, right? So they have oil and gas resources, they have land, they have drilling things and oil and gas processing plants and gas stations and all of this stuff. The state owns it all, the government owns it all, but how do you transfer it to regular people? Right? Like, how do you go about doing that? Who gets it? Can they buy it? Nobody has enough money to buy it. Like, what do you do? Like, how do you get it to them? Right? And that's the struggle that's one of the struggles that Yeltsin is going to have to deal with, right? Is because market economies have no controls, but of course when he takes the controls away from the market, the prices go up. But then he's also got to get all of these industries and businesses into the hands of regular people. And the question is, how do you do it, right? So he's trying to make these economic reforms. We read in the textbook that he has an attempted coup to deal with on his own, right? So in 1993, the people are so upset with his market reforms not going well that, again, people try to overthrow the government, right? They show up with guns and try to take over, right? And we see that Yeltsin brings in the tanks, fights the rebels, and manages to, end the coup, right? And keep them from taking over the state. But again, we see another attempt to overthrow the government and take control. And it doesn't work in, I guess it's 1989, I think, or 1990. Doesn't work in 1990. Doesn't work here in 1993 either. But holy cow, that's a lot of attempted government overthrows, right? I want to come back to Putin in a sec. But I want to kind of walk you through what Boris Yeltsin tries to do, okay? Because again, he's trying to take a socialist economy, a communist economy, and turn it into a market economy. And again, there's no playbook for this, right? There's no instruction manual of how to do it. Nobody's ever done it before. And so I'm just going to jump here. Right. So yeah. Right. So this is his challenge here, to dismantle socialism and to build a capitalist market economy, right? Huge task. And so his approach comes to be known as something called shock therapy, okay? And basically what he tried to do is he tried to do everything fast, right? And he figured that if he, it's like when you've got a Band-Aid on, if you've got a cut and you got a Band-Aid and they tell you, like, if you pull it slowly, it hurts more. And so they just tell you to, like, take it off really quick and it'll hurt less. And that's kind of what Yeltsin tries to do. He's like, let's just change it all really quick and hopefully it won't hurt as much, right? And so, again, he makes a lot of changes that are pretty drastic pretty quickly, right? So, again, the price controls that were on the market, keeping the prices down, those are gone, right? State subsidies, so places where the state was giving money to companies in order to keep the prices down, that money is gone too, right? And prices kind of shoot up. He increases interest rates. So if you're looking for a loan, you're going to pay big interest for it, right? And he makes it tougher to get loans as well. He creates new taxes, again, cuts back on government subsidies. Social programs are over, right? Retirement pensions and things like that, gone. And so things get really kind of tough for Russians, right? As prices go up, there's economic chaos, subsidies are cut, people are losing their jobs. It's an ugly mess, right? And so, yeah, the prices kind of skyrocket. There's inflation, well, I guess deflation. The living standards of regular Russians actually drop lower. So you can imagine that, their standard of living has been lower than everyone else for a while, and then they finally get to switch to a market economy, and as soon as they do, their standard of living gets even worse, right? Which is not what they wanted. They wanted increase, right? But it actually decreases. So again, through the 90s, Russia's GDP, their gross domestic product, falls by 50%. That is unbelievable, right? Countries nowadays, if their GDP drops by a couple of percent, they get very worried. Alarm bells start ringing. If it drops by 50%, that is catastrophic, right? That is super bad, right? Super, super bad. Again, hyperinflation wipes out people's savings, right? The value of the ruble decreases. And so now, you used to be paying 10 rubles for a loaf of bread. Now you're paying 100, right? Next week you're paying 1,000. And so all of that money you have in the bank, worthless, right? You used to have $100,000. Now your $100,000 is worth like $100, right? So people lose their savings, they lose their jobs, they can't afford anything. It is ugly, right? But it's ugly for most people, but not for everyone, okay? And there's a few people who manage to come out of this really well, right? they're in the right place at the right time. They have access to resources, they do the right thing, and it makes them super, super rich. And again, today, if you Google a list of, the richest people in the world, you will find these guys still on that list. And the reason they're on that list is because of what happens in 1992 and 1993 as Yeltsin tries to take government companies and resources and get them into private hands. These guys are able to get huge sectors of the market, right? Huge sectors of oil and gas and mining and all kinds of things. And so, as I say, for most Russians, it is catastrophic, right? And so most people are suffering. The Russian mafia and organized crime are making tons of money. And these guys here, these oligarchs, as they're now called, these guys are in the right place at the right time, and they make themselves wildly wealthy. Okay, but we'll deal with them tomorrow. Okay, so that's about it. You can pack it up. Tomorrow we'll just review this really quickly, and then we'll talk about Vladimir Putin because he's worth talking about. So that's it. You can pack it up. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay.